There's the bells and whistles.
Oh shit! Now I'm off the.
What a way to start the show. We are live for another episode of 5 Rounds here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network, previewing UFC 266 coming up Saturday night. That is tomorrow, or it could already be Saturday, depending on when you watch this, whether you're watching live or watching on a replay. September 25th. It is Nick Diaz Day tomorrow. I'm really upset today because a certain misbehaving individual is trying to take headlines away from Nick Diaz, because this show should really be all about the return of the king, who's been away from the octagon for 6 years, when a certain Jon Bones Jones is trying to steal all the headlines for many negative reasons. But before we get into that, I want to remind you that this and every episode of 5 Rounds here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network is served by the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Make this your spot to watch every UFC pay-per-view fight for zero cover charge. You pay nothing at the door at the Quarterdeck to watch every UFC pay-per-view fight. The seafood is delicious, guys. Oh my God, the buffalo shrimp is my favorite appetizer on the planet. The fresh fish, the oysters, the Maine lobster. I love the sushi. They have great sushi at the Quarterdeck, and I love to build my own poke bowl. So make sure you're taking advantage. Also, not only can you watch every UFC pay-per-view fight for no cover at the Quarterdeck, show up on college football Saturdays, NFL Sundays. You can spend the entire day there watching football on the big flat screen high definition TVs, and you can take advantage of the 5 for $15 ice cold bucket special. Buckets of Heineken Light, Amstel Light, High Noon Hard Seltzer, or mix and match them. 5 for $15 ice cold buckets all football season long and all year long, every day all year long. 2 for 1 happy hour all day, every day at the Quarterdeck. So if you want to peep their menu or find the location nearest to you, you can visit them on the web at quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. So a very eventful weekend in combat sports. I am Alex Donno. Alongside, as always, let me introduce the man who is diagonal below me here on the frame, James Walker. James, good evening, sir. How are you?
Happy to be here. A lot to talk about this week. I think this week kind of encapsulated everything we both love and hate about MMA, all in about 7 days.
I could have said it better myself. Let me also introduce the man with nearly 50 Twitter followers. You can find him, if you can find him, on Twitter at realfrank_Z. I don't know if he loves him some Nick Diaz as much as I do, but he's there. I've tried to convert him over the years. Frank Zaffere. Frank, how you doing, man?
I'm great. I like James. I'm excited. I mean, it's not often that you have so much to talk about in a given week in this sport that I don't think an hour and a half is going to be enough time.
Yeah. Listen, Jon Bones Jones, there's never a dull moment with this guy when you think about, greatest light heavyweight of all time, but so troubled outside of the octagon. All the issues over the years, from the cocaine use, crashing the Bentleys, various arrests over the years, and he's gotten himself into trouble again. The crazy part about this one is, and this has been stealing headlines for the last few hours, so Jon Jones was getting inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame on Friday, and he talked at that ceremony about, how well he's doing in the gym. He's never been this focused before in his career. He's just kicking ass and taking names, getting ready for his move up to heavyweight. And then hours later, Jon Bones Jones gets himself arrested, facing charges of battery, domestic violence, and injuring and tampering with a vehicle after being arrested early Friday morning in Las Vegas. All of this sounds very, very bad. Now, Frank Z, you were telling me off air before we got started that they've actually, and this is good news, or at least better news for Jon, that they've reduced the charges from felony to misdemeanor.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an ugly scene for a guy who has a bad track record, but at least we know that when they make it a misdemeanor, that we're not talking about potential jail time, and we're not talking about potentially getting removed from upcoming fights or suspended, etc. So that is good news. But can I ask a quick question? This Hall of Fame induction, was that for a fight?
It was for a fight.
That for him? All right, I just want to make sure I understood that. So that
it was for I'm sure it was the first fight, not the second fight, because the first fight was one of the most epic things ever with Alexander Gustafsson. You remember that war that they had, that first fight?
I do. I just wanted to make sure because the UFC is so quick to put people in the Hall of Fame. They start doing it while they're still active fighters. I'm really going to be upset.
Frank, is there like I've been to Vegas before, obviously. Like, is there, because I know that there are some in the world, there are some Hall of Fames that are like only digital and like there's not actually a hall. Is there an actual Hall of Fame? Like, can you go to a physical Hall of Fame for the UFC in Las Vegas and like walk down the hall, or is it one of those things that the Hall of Fame exists at UFC.com? Do either of you know?
I believe that you can go in it. It's part of their facility. So yes, I believe you can see it.
That's
you
something
you can experience it. Yeah.
I guess my experience in Vegas just usually starts and ends at the blackjack table. I haven't made my way to the UFC Hall of Fame just yet.
If only the UFC Hall of Fame was on the Strip, and then we would all
Wouldn't that
see
be
it.
something? if it was like inside the MGM Grand, then maybe right next to a craps table, then maybe I'll see it. James, like Frank said, this is an ugly thing for Jon. Whether they reduced it, even though they've reduced it from felony to misdemeanor, it's still a really bad look for a guy who's had a really hard time staying out of trouble. Should we be worried about him personally, because he's had so many issues over the years? You have to wonder how much of these are cries for help, and why is this guy not seemingly getting better?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of this, right? And we've kind of touched on it a little bit. There's the personal side, of Jon Jones, and then there's the professional side, and how much this impacts each side. And I must be in the minority, because I feel like every single time he gets in trouble, I'm kind of surprised, and it's like enough time goes by to where you kind of forget about it, and you're like, okay, he hasn't fought in about a year and a half. He hasn't gotten in trouble in about a year and a half or so, 2 years. And then when it happens, boom, it's like, oh man, Jon Jones got in trouble. It still shocks me, even though it's about the fifth time that it happened. So, focusing on the professional side mostly with Jon, I think the worst thing professionally for him is that this takes any leverage that he had about getting that major $10 million payday or whatever it was reported.
A great point.
His highest fight purse ever for him. This takes it away. And I think the one thing that we learned about the UFC during this pandemic without Jon Jones is that the UFC doesn't really need Jon Jones anymore. I mean, have we really consumed the UFC any less with Jon Jones not being active for the last year and a half or 2 years? While we wait, it's going to be about 2.5 years by the time he fights. I feel like the UFC has actually grown in popularity. I feel like other fighters like the Adesanyas and the Dustin Poiriers and other stars have really developed in absence of Jon Jones. So there was already a lot of leverage on the UFC side, and now they have a ton of leverage to say, Jon, you're under contract. If you want this fight, take it. Fight for what you're getting paid, which is still a good sum of money. But we're not going to put $10 million on the line, and put that major risk. It's just too risky for the UFC. Who knows if he will make it, another 8 months or a year, to that next fight without, another infraction. I mean, he's kind of burned that bridge of trust, if he hadn't already, but he definitely burned it for this particular fight.
Frank, do you disagree that the UFC, because James basically said, the UFC doesn't need Jon Jones as much as they did a few years ago. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't think the UFC needs any fighter. I've argued that the UFC, the brand, I think Dana White's still the biggest star in the league. But we do need Jon Jones. Us fans, we need Jon Jones. He walked away from the light heavyweight division. Does anyone give a crap about that division now? No. Casual fans do not care. And look, yes, will the UFC survive and make tons of money without him? Sure. But if he fights, they're going to make a lot of money. And right now, not right now, but over the past few years, Jon Jones went from what Rashad Evans called a two-faced guy to purely evil.
Yes.
I mean, he embraced the dark side. He became the Floyd Mayweather of our sport in some respects, unparalleled, really, truly undefeated, and nasty as hell. Not a good guy. And there's marketability in that. And as sinister and as ugly as what I'm about to say is, it's true. This latest incident being relegated to a misdemeanor means he adds to his bad guy persona, but it doesn't hold him out of competing. I think he makes more money based on this. I think it's
really.
I think Ciryl Gane or Francis and Gandu, either guy will be perceived as the white knight, The force of good versus the force of evil. Can the force of evil ever be defeated? Because no one's ever beaten this guy. I think you make a ton of money on this fight. So, yeah, if I'm disagreeing in that respect, yes.
Interesting.
Frank, you had a great line before the show. We know Jon Jones's former manager, who was his manager for many years, Malky Kawa from why can I not first round man? Yeah, I was going to say, why is the name of his company? He's got some friend I can't even remember the name of his company. Malky Kawa from First Round Management. John recently left First Round, and Richard Schaefer, former Golden Boy CEO, is now his manager. And now Richard Schaefer is getting a taste of what Malky had to deal with for very many years, because Malky had to deal with Jones's hit and run. He had to deal with, Jones crashing the Bentley and the cocaine issue. And maybe Richard Schaefer thought, I'm getting the mature Bones. I'm getting the guy who's put all these issues behind him. And yet here we are.
Yeah, but, Malky, with all due respect, he's great at his job, but he was handling it incorrectly. He was trying to make John somebody he isn't. I think what you need to do is he just needs somebody who's going to put enough people around him to keep him from making the really big mistake, but otherwise celebrate the fact that he's a bad guy. He's a villain. That's his part. That's the role he plays in the marketing machine. And, when he steps back into the octagon, everyone's going to want him to lose. And nothing sells like that.
And Alex, you forgot to mention the picograms as well. There's just so much,
so
much that just adds to his, to the negative side of things. And Frank, you bring up a very interesting point, man. I really didn't think about that. If you sell it right and embrace the storyline, embrace the dark side, so to speak, it could work out like that. Because I'm thinking about the old Jon Jones, who was never the biggest star. He was always the best fighter, but he was never the most, the highest selling fighter. They always needed, even his Daniel Cormier fights, didn't sell like Conor McGregor or, some of the current recent pay-per-views. So yeah, I mean, it could work out in his favor. Unfortunately, I think that kind of empowers him at a time that he really doesn't need to be empowered for what his actions are. So it's really just unfortunate, but it is the fight game. And look, no one they're prize fighters. No one expects prize fighters to be angels. This isn't some of the other sports where, in hockey and baseball and the NFL, NBA, a guy gets in trouble, they kind of get dragged through the mud. In prize fighting, I think there's a little bit more from the fandom delineation between the two. Mike Tyson, you can appreciate Mike Tyson, the fighter, and know that he was a maniac, away from the ring, per se. You can't really draw that delineation in other sports as well as you can with fighting.
I would just add also that you brought up Daniel Cormier. It's a great example. I thought going into those matchups, that's when Jon Jones truly crossed over, where they had those terrible, shoving
100%.
Incident and those
and the big one. Do you remember when they had that video interview with ESPN and somebody leaked the off-air conversation that they had where Jon Jones is like, "What's up, pussy?" And they had that little exchange, and somebody leaked it, and then we're all like, "Oh, this dude's kind of a mean SOB. I wasn't sure if we knew that about Jon Jones." Okay.
And Daniel Cormier just recently came out and talked about it, and I loved what he said. He said, after the second fight where Jon Jones beat him with that leg kick, and really put him out, I think that fight was ultimately overturned. But Jon Jones in the presser afterwards, Daniel Cormier was crying, and Jon Jones was making fun of him. And Daniel Cormier commented just a day or two ago. He said, "I love that. Be who you are. That's who you are." And I think that's when the fandom that can really surround this guy and the interest in him fighting, then it goes up exponentially.
Huge shout out to our guy Alex M in the chat, who absolutely loves Jon Jones. Oh, Nathan Diaz, who even watches this show? I'd like to think that's the real Nate Diaz. I hope it is. And I hope he knows we are at least I am the biggest Diaz brothers fans alive. But no, I want to go back to this comment from Alex M. And we're going to talk a lot about Nick Diaz in a moment. He says, "I love Jon Jones. I hope he never changes. Lean in all the way. That's my favorite fighter. Keep winning." Well, I hope he never changes. Alex says, personality-wise, he's not changing. But something, Frank, I want to get your take. And then James, give me your piece as well. I don't know if this is a good idea, because Richard Schaefer talked about Jon wanting to put on, and in the process of putting on, a ton of weight moving up to heavyweight. that he wants to be at around 270, 275 and actually cutting weight to get down to the heavyweight limit. Honestly, for his frame, I really don't know if that's a good idea. And I'm sure, listen, who am I to say? Because I'm sure he's got great nutritionists and smarter people than me working with him on this transformation. I just think for somebody that is already really strong and can take with him to heavyweight a speed advantage against the vast majority of his opponents, slowing himself down by putting on, no matter how lean it might be, 275 pounds, not putting on that much, but bulking up to 275 pounds. To me, Frank, that seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I worry that psychologically he thinks he can't handle the grappling and absorbing of punches unless he's bigger himself. I don't think that's the case. He was an enormous 205-pound fighter in stature and in strength. So, but I'm also surprised that he's had this struggle to put that weight on, because if you look at his brothers, you would think he could go right to 300 without any issue. But I guess he is just naturally much leaner than his two brothers.
Yeah, and all of his body weight's in his upper body. You know, he has really skinny legs from the waist down. So putting all that weight on the upper body, I could just see him being a little stiff. And his flexibility, his pliability, his quickness, his creativity, all those things is what makes Jon Jones Jon Jones. And doing it that way, especially putting most of it in his upper body, I just don't see that being a great idea. And his punching power, he's never gonna be a one-punch knockout guy. I don't care how much weight he puts on, how much strength he gets and bulk he gets. He's not gonna be a Francis and Gandu. That's just not his fighting style. That's just not his natural ability. So I don't really see the point of doing that unless it's like you said, Frank, that the thought of being able to absorb more punishment. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's kind of better to be quick and avoid the punishment than to take the hits and see if you can absorb them.
Mm-hmm.
And James, he already beat the greatest heavyweight we'd ever seen twice. I mean, admittedly, Cormier was cutting down, but we now know from his towel grabs that he wasn't cutting down that much. So, he was already beating up the heavyweight champ. So, what the hell?
So again, I'm really, really upset actually at Jon Jones. I guess Alex M is not so upset about it because he's the biggest Jon Jones fans on the planet. But I'm the biggest Nick Diaz fan and Nate Diaz fan on the planet. And what Jon Jones has already done here is robbed us of 17 and a half minutes that we could have spent talking about the greatest of all time in one Nicholas Diaz, who's making his return from 6 years away. And we're going to get into that. We're also going to get into a little bit more Jon Jones stuff as well, because I think there's a question worth asking. And by the way, later on in the show, in about 20 to 25 minutes, Jonathan Ramlakan, lead MMA reporter from 5 Reasons Sports, is going to join us to help us make fight picks for UFC 266. You all know who I'm picking in the middle fight on the pay-per-view. But we'll make full fight picks for the main card. But before we get to that, Frank, why don't you lead the way with a new edition of The Toss-Up?
All right, give me 1 second. Sorry, I wasn't prepared. All right, first question. How will Jon Jones' legacy be affected by all of the trouble outside of the cage?
Honestly, the legacy, not so much, because hasn't he, for his entire fighting career, been Teflon? I mean, every time this guy has gotten into trouble, he still managed to come back, win fights. I mean, he's never lost a fight legitimately. His only loss was a bullshit disqualification against Matt Hamill like more than a decade ago, well over it, almost 15 years ago, I think. So I honestly, I really don't think, and Frank, again, like we discussed, not to say I'm condoning the way he behaves himself, I'm not. The fact that these charges are down to now a misdemeanor means he's unlikely to get punished by the UFC for this in any way, shape, or form. He's still the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Now, you could have another conversation and say, with the time that Jon has been forced to miss over the years due to his issues outside of the octagon, including PED suspension and, the other legal trouble that's caused him to miss time, how much greater could his legacy be if not for some of this outside of the cage stuff? But as far as, the legacy being affected from what it is now, I don't think this affects him much. He's still, arguably the greatest of all time and certainly the greatest light heavyweight of all time. What do you think, James?
Yeah, legacy to me means how you remember the person, how you remember the fighter, the athlete, the person. And I was going to remember Jon Jones partially for his out of the cage trouble anyway. So this doesn't really impact, anymore how I was going to remember. Great fighter in the cage, arguably the greatest ever, probably top 2 or 3 for sure. and definitely the greatest light heavyweight. And out of the cage, just heavily troubled, and this really just adds to the same thought that I had of his legacy anyway. So this doesn't really change anything per se. It's just another, sort of another nugget in that respect.
You guys know, I said it a few minutes ago. I think embracing the dark side makes him really, really marketable and interesting to fans. So that part doesn't really bother me as long as he can stay fighting. I think the legacy issue is more a problem for the UFC than it is for Jon Jones. I think Jon Jones was poised to be the Nike figure, the way LeBron James is for basketball, et cetera. And everyone had to walk away from that when he started having these problems. So I think for UFC branding and mainstream marketing, I think the UFC suffered probably more than Jon Jones has. And then, Alex, to your point about him being the greatest 205er ever, I'd argue he's currently the greatest mixed martial artist we've ever seen.
Yeah.
You look at the people that he's gone through, man. Oh, my God. Like, he's fought everybody. And, at their peak. So I would argue right now that, trouble aside, it's the best mixed martial artist I've ever seen.
By the way, I like this question from Alex M., who knows that sometimes on Donno Daily, I like to channel my inner Alex Jones. Why does the media treat Jones different than McGregor? Well, here's the deal. You have to understand, guys, it's the globalists. There's an agenda. George Soros, Hillary Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein, he's dead now, but he was part of this. There's an absolute agenda, guys. The media, they're a bunch of soul-sucking vampires, and they have this agenda against Jon Bones Jones. Conor McGregor, he's part of the Illuminati. Jon Bones Jones is not, so they treat him as such. So, yeah, they're definitely – but there is a disparity, right? And listen, it certainly may have something to do with race. It just might have something to do with the way McGregor conducts himself. But honestly, I think it is fair to say that Jon Jones's outside the octagon trouble is treated not by this show because the three of us give McGregor a hard time plenty. So yeah. I don't think you have any hypocrisy on this show. We give Jones a hard time when he deserves it. We certainly give McGregor a hard time when he gets into trouble. So, yeah, I think there is a hypocrisy out there.
Alex, 100%. Look, I don't want to go sideways with the show because we could go on and on with this, but 100% it's a race issue, 100%. Mm-hmm. Look, I hate to say it, but with Conor McGregor, you could see there was that. You remember back in boxing with the Great White Hope whole thing that, was going on there, with all those people that feel that way, hoping that someone of that skin tone could take over boxing again. Conor McGregor is like that. And I would include Brazilians and others that compete in the sport. And he was kind of him against them. And it's unsettling because that's exactly what it is. Conor McGregor is every bit as troubled. And I would argue more unstable.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And you got to consider the MMA media is very young, just like the sport. So there's a lot of inexperience there. There's a lot of, biases that aren't kept in that sort of professional box, so to speak. And there's a fandom as well. So, I don't think it's just relegated to MMA. I think sometimes the racial gap sort of transcends through a lot of sports. But yeah, if you want to compare, I think there is an element there. I'm just not sure how strong that element is, but there definitely is an element there.
All right. Question number 2. That was a good first question, Alex. You penned a good one.
It's taken more time away from the man we should be talking about.
All right. Well, let's get to him then. What's your favorite Nick Diaz fight of all time?
Oh, that's like asking a father of like 10 to pick his favorite child. I think
we got to worry about his answer too because he's watched all the sparring films. He's got all that stuff too. Yeah.
Oh, sure. And listen, I've watched his fights through every organization he's been in. Of course, UFC, Pride. His Gogo Plata victory over Takanori Gomi is simply one of the greatest performances of all time. Strikeforce, Elite XC. I've watched Nick Diaz all over the world. I think the fight of this will be my answer because I've rewatched this one the most because just the pure drama of it and just pure enjoyment factor from the high pace of action. Nick Diaz versus Paul Daly.
You took mine too.
Yeah. Come on.
It's one of the greatest fights ever. He also I think this fight, I don't know, I hope I'm not taking your next one because another one that I enjoyed because I got to watch this one live. It was at the BB&T Center with Strikeforce when he beat Marius Zaromskis. That was another fun one. Well, what do you got, Frank?
Oh no, it's James first.
Oh, sorry. You were so excited, Frank. I'll let James go first.
I'll be quick. It was Paul Daly. That was my favorite Nick Diaz fight. Kind of back and forth. In that respect, and it was one of those fights that was it wasn't a long drawn out fight where the Diaz brother got stronger at the end of it. It was just like rock 'em, sock 'em right off the bat. So it's a little bit different style there. So yeah, you took my pick, but that was my pick.
All right, I'll take one that is going to surprise you. I'm going to take his fight with George St. Pierre. And the reason I'm going to pick that is because of what George St. Pierre said after the fight, which is that the whole time he was walking around the facility and in the hotel, he was terrified that at any moment the elevator door would open and Nick would be there, because he knew whenever he confronted him, whenever they entered the same space, the fight would begin. And I thought that awesome. was a brilliant it was a really great admission by George St. Pierre. It was unbelievably giving in terms of sharing, his real emotions. But it also lended itself to why Nick Diaz is so damn popular. He's authentic. He will punch you in the elevator. He came to fight you. If he sees you there, he's going to hit you there or otherwise. So that whole scene, the fight was boring, but that whole scene around that fight is very entertaining.
And honestly, another really good one, I think it's appropriate to bring this up, was the first fight between the two men who are going to square off again on Saturday. The Nick Diaz Robbie Lawler fight from back in 2004 was awesome. I wish my memory of 17 years ago was this great, but I just rewatched this fight within the last week or so. And a couple of things that really tripped me out about rewatching it. First of all, it's crazy when you watch a fight, and like I don't think I watched this live when it happened, but I did watch it around the time when it happened, around 2004. And when you go back and watch footage of something that happened 17 years ago, just based on how crappy the TV cameras were, there was no HD, like the quality of the microphones the UFC was using sounded really bad. Like, I don't know, it felt like I was watching something that happened like in the early 90s, not in 2004. It was really weird. But a couple of things that tripped me out about that fight, it was action, and Diaz ended up knocking out Lawler, which was unexpected. Hearing Joe Rogan with Mike Goldberg on the commentary, they were so surprised by a couple things in that fight, and it's like they kind of weren't that prepared for it, I thought. Like, Joe Rogan was flabbergasted by the fact that Nick Diaz kept trash-talking Lawler, like, during the fight. He was like, I've never seen this before. Oh, my God. Well, okay, we've gotten 17 years worth of that from both Diaz brothers since. And then they were also really surprised because clearly they had just read, and I don't think it was his very first fight in the UFC, but it was one of his first fights in the UFC. Clearly they had just kind of looked over his bio, and they didn't know a whole lot about what Diaz brought to the table, because they kept saying, wow, the jiu-jitsu fighter is throwing a lot of punches. Like, we thought he would have to take this to the ground. Like, they didn't realize this guy loves him some boxing.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jake. Who would you consider to be an uncrowned champion right now in the UFC?
Yeah, and I wanted to include this in the questions because a lot of people consider Dustin Poirier to be an uncrowned champion in the lightweight division. He was even asked about that this week, and he kind of downplayed it, wanted to show some respect to Charles Oliveira, who's the champion in his weight class, and, kind of chuckle along with it. I think there's some validity to that, though, because, I mean, he's only a few months away from fighting for that belt. We think the fight's going to go down at UFC 269, and I think Poirier is going to win that fight. So I think it's only a matter of a few months before Poirier goes from uncrowned to crowned champion. But my personal answer on the uncrowned champion, I can really sort of cop out on this one and say every Dagestan-born fighter on that roster at some point is going to be a champion. And I'll start with Islam Makhachev because, listen, I think Dustin Poirier is going to win that belt in a few months, but then it's only a matter of time because as soon as Islam is ready to fight for that belt, he's just going to be handing it right over to Dagestan, man.
Wow, that's quite a prediction. So you got Poirier losing to Islam in 2022. Yep. Interesting. I'll go Max Holloway, and with Max, I thought the second Volkanovski fight both fights were really close, but I thought a better case could be made that Max won that second fight with Volkanovski. Volkanovski hasn't fought since. Max has looked really, really good. In his one fight since. I think he's the best fighter. I think he's the best featherweight in the world right now, and he just doesn't have the belt, partially due to a bad decision, a bad call. It was a close fight, so it wasn't a robbery. But I do think Max Holloway is the uncrowned champ, and I do think he'll beat the winner of the main event at 266, which we'll get into between Volkanovski and Ortega.
By the way, a quick throw-in before Frank reads the last toss-up question.
Well, I got to answer the question. I didn't get to answer the question.
Oh, my bad. Go ahead, answer it.
No, go ahead. You're on a roll.
No, answer it. You're on a roll.
All right, I got two. I mean, first of all, everybody knows Aljamain Sterling's got somebody else's belt. Come on.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and then that's a gimme. I can't believe you guys let that one fall to me. And then the second one is our lead subject of the show, Jon Jones.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Nick Diaz.
He's the greatest fighter of all time in mixed martial arts. Just as soon as he steps in there against anybody who's holding the belt, he's leaving with it.
Which
heavy their head.
Heavyweight? You're saying he's uncrowned at heavyweight?
At light heavyweight, certainly.
Yeah, at light heavyweight, certainly. And then heavyweight, I'm coming around to the idea that there's neither one of those guys can beat him.
Wow.
Well, I'll give you, and by the way, Jon Jones revealed in that comment that he made, when he was giving his commentary about how much weight he's going to gain, etc. He said he was open to fighting Stipe, which I think would be fantastic because, I mean, talk about instilling fear in either Gon or Ngannou when he absolutely takes Stipe Miocic apart. Go ahead, Alex. I cut you off. You were on a roll too.
No. But I cut you off before you cut me off, so it's all good. But no, I like this question, especially the second part of it. I like the first part of it as well. But he says the best days in the UFC were the TRT days. I know Frank agrees with me on that one. He says I miss the Goldberg-Rogan duo. That was a good one. Was that the best announced team ever? Because honestly, I don't know, because I never really liked Mike Goldberg. I always thought the guy was a little bit hokey and cookie cutter. But I will say this, and James, I don't know if you agree or disagree with me on this one. I do think Joe Rogan was a lot better with Mike Goldberg than he is with any of the other guys. And I don't know if that's Rogan's fault because, he's making this FU money now from Spotify and his comedy career is bigger than it's ever been. So it's like he probably just shows up and gets on the microphone. Like I think there was a time when Rogan needed that job in the UFC, and those days are now years behind him. Like he doesn't need that job. He probably just enjoys the extra exposure and the paycheck from it. So I don't know if it's Rogan's fault that he's no longer as good, or it's just that he doesn't have chemistry with any of these teams. Like when he's on commentary with Anik and Cormier, he doesn't really fit in there. First of all, I'm not a fan of 3-man booths. I just think it's a little bit too much. But then also, it's hard for Joe Rogan to fit as an analyst when your other analyst is a former UFC champ and Olympic wrestler. So it's like, it's really hard. Like, it's not that Joe Rogan isn't capable of providing, and I'm a fan of his. So it's not that he isn't capable of providing good analysis on fights because he's been doing that job for so many years. But it's like, I can kind of put myself in his shoes and say, if I'm the third wheel, when the second wheel is a former 2-division champ and a wrestling champ, what am I supposed to say that he hasn't already covered? And what insight can I give when the guy next to me actually has the insight of being a high-level former pro fighter and, the highest level fighting that Rogan ever did? Like he was he did Taekwondo tournaments, but he's not a former UFC champion, like Cormier is.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And just to even make it in simpler terms, Rogan was able to be the analyst and Goldberg was the play-by-play guy. And, they had their roles clearly defined. With the 3-man booth during a fight, which is so fast, so many things are happening, so much is going on, and you have 3 people trying to talk at the same time. It just makes it a little more convoluted. And I think that sort of impacts the chemistry. So I don't think Joe Rogan will ever have the chemistry with whoever his partners are. And they rotate. Sometimes it's Dominic Cruz, sometimes it's Daniel Cormier. Sometimes, it's hard to have chemistry like he had with Mike Goldberg in the beginning.
Yeah, you're going to see Joe Rogan go away from the sport in the not too distant future and his current role. He was instrumental in bringing it to casual fans. He was relatable, he was interesting, and teamed up with oh my God, I just blanked his name, but teamed up with Mike Goldberg. Yeah. Joe was the only one who actually knew what he was talking about, so he seemed like a really smart analyst. Now, he's the last person, honestly, I want to hear from when it comes down to telling me exactly what's happening, what a fighter's thinking. He has no idea what a fighter's thinking. This is about what's going on with these guys that they've got now, Dominic, Daniel Cormier, and
Paul Felder.
Paul Felder. I mean, these guys are doing a really, really good job.
They are.
And I've been very, very impressed. And I also like that we're using retired fighters. I can't stand when we have active fighters participating in this in any way, shape, or form. I just feel like it just muddies the waters. They're affected by what they can say, etc. So let's keep it to retired guys, Dana White. Are you ready for the next one? I think I got one more. I have two more. I got one more. Could you throw a better first pitch than Conor McGregor?
Guys, I honestly, and I'm not trying to say I'm more athletic than Conor McGregor, but I swear to God, I could throw a better first pitch than Conor McGregor. He threw a first pitch at a Cubs game this week, and it was one of the worst ever. I mean, I think 50 Cent and McGregor also got really defensive about it. He went on this Instagram tirade because people were comparing, like saying that he had the worst first pitch ever. And then he found like maybe the one first pitch that was worse than his, and it was from 50 Cent. And they were very similar. Like, I'm not even sure which one was worse, but he was like, you can't tell me that my first pitch was worse than this guy's first pitch. And he was going on and on and on about it. It's like, dude, stop whining like a little bitch and accept the fact that you threw a terrible first pitch. So it's either McGregor, 50 Cent, or Baba Booey from the Howard Stern show, who had an infamous bad first pitch years ago. Some of the worst first pitches of all time. I'm telling you, man, I didn't play baseball past the second grade, but I did have a grandfather who was a former minor league pitcher, and he and I used to throw the ball all the time. And, you know, he actually used to, back in the 40s, he used to work out, literally, I'm not making this up, he used to work out with Babe Ruth and Bob Feller. And he looked at my arm like 60 years later. He said, you actually got a pretty good arm, kid. So I'm telling you, I could throw a better first pitch than Conor McGregor. That is one of my few claims to athletic fame.
Well, I could throw a better first pitch than Conor McGregor also. And just my athletic background, I played high school football for 4 years. I was a average to above average high school football athlete. Never played in college, played some intramural basketball. Tried out for the baseball team, couldn't make it because I couldn't hit the ball, but I actually could throw and catch a little bit.
That's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't hit the ball, but I can do everything else. I actually almost made the team because I could run the bases. I was the fastest guy on the team.
Nice.
But I couldn't get on base unless I walked. But anyway, here's the thing about first pitches. Why are people see celebrities so hung up on velocity? No one's clocking these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Throw it at 3/4 speed. Focus on accuracy, get the ball to the plate. If any of us throw the ball at half speed or 3/4 speed, we could throw the ball pretty straight from the mound, to the home plate. But 50 Cent, people like Conor McGregor, they want to prove so much, and they're throwing these fastballs trying to clock at 80 miles per hour when, no one's clocking them, no one cares. And only thing people can focus on is the accuracy on social media. When you see a pitch, no one says, oh, that was 85 miles. Oh, that was 75 miles. They say, whoa, that one went all the way in the stands, or that went all the way left. Just focus on the accuracy and not the velocity. And I think these celebrities would do a lot better. That would be my strategy. I would throw it at 3/4 speed, 70% speed, make sure it's straight. I wouldn't try to throw it 100% because my ball would probably go in the stands as well.
James, you're 100%. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, no, I was just going to say that I was watching like a compilation today of a bunch of UFC fighters who have thrown first pitches. And like Stipe threw kind of a decent one, but it actually wasn't as good as I thought it would be because he played baseball like in college. So I thought he would have had it was a decent first pitch. And then there was someone who did pretty much exactly what James said you should do. So it was low velocity, but it did get there. I want to say it was Rashad Evans at a Marlins game years ago. I may be wrong on that, but I think it was Rashad Evans who kind of did what you said. He didn't go for the heater. He just sort of threw it very slowly, but somewhat accurately.
If you've never played baseball, you don't understand till you get out there just how far that mound is from where that ball's got to get to.
Yep.
So you're 100%. You both are 100% right. It's just getting the ball there. You're not throwing a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. You're not equipped to do it. But I would also add, hey, how about before you show up there, you go in the gym, you go behind the gym, and you throw a couple baseballs at a wall or something. Because Conor McGregor put as much preparation into this as he did to Dustin Poirier, and the results showed. I mean, he showed up there. He had no idea how far he was going to have to throw it. He looked like he was throwing it with his right hand. He's a left-handed guy. He looked like he was throwing it with his right hand. It was really, really bad. But embarrassing things can't happen enough to this guy. I can't get enough pleasure out of it. So I just hope he ends up punching somebody in a bar over it and we get another news story. I mean, I could not dislike this guy more.
Yeah, he seems to be losing his mind a little bit over that.
God.
So that'll do it for the toss-up. Something a lot of people are shocked by something that Nick Diaz said earlier this week, and he kind of clarified it a little bit in the pre-fight press conference when he talked about hating fighting. And hearing him say that did not surprise me whatsoever, because I've heard him say things like that over the years, that he does not enjoy fighting. But then a lot of people are like, how can a guy who's a professional fighter say he doesn't like fighting? And then I see a lot of headlines around the internet like, should Nick Diaz actually be stepping into the octagon? Is it dangerous for a guy who doesn't like fighting to be fighting professionally? He's hated fighting his entire career. But I think people are getting this a little bit wrong. And it doesn't help Diaz that he's very inarticulate. So you ask this guy to explain what he meant, with an ambiguous comment, and he's going to give you an answer that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I speak Diaz. I am fluent in Diaz. And
that's the first bad thing I've heard you say about Nick Diaz ever.
Well, listen, man, I gotta cut it. He's even less articulate than Nate, and that's a little bit troublesome. But I think that, and I'm not saying like he enjoys getting in there trying to hurt people, but I think people are overplaying that aspect of it. I think that what Diaz was talking about when he says he hates fighting is, I get the sense that the part of fighting that he hates the most is the dog and pony show of it, right? Everything that comes with being a UFC fighter. He hates doing press. We know that. I was surprised he showed up to the press conference yesterday. Like when they were starting to put together the presser and I'm watching it, live on YouTube, I'm like, is he actually going to show up for this, or is he going to do what he did years ago before the George St. Pierre fight? He hates doing press. He also does not like the pressure and expectations that come with these fights. Like, he would just prefer to go in there, and fight guys in the gym without millions of people, betting on him and then crap talking him after the fight if he doesn't win it. Like, I don't think he likes the pressure and expectations. And I think he hates, and he said this in his clarification yesterday, one of the few parts I understood, he hates having to worry about his weight and all that sort of stuff. So, like, I think people who are saying, should you really allow a guy into the octagon who doesn't like fighting? Is that dangerous? I think you're misunderstanding the fact that it's not just getting into the octagon and doing your thing. And he even said, once I'm in there, it all kind of clicks for me. It's the whole dog and pony show that comes with being a professional UFC prize fighter. That's the part he hates, because he also mentioned in recent years when he stepped away from it for a while, he came to realize there's more to life than all of this.
Alex, all great points, but I think you missed the biggest point. And this is the thing that stood out to me in the interview that he had with ESPN. He's upset that he's fighting a rematch with Robbie Lawler. He's not happy. He's not happy with the matchup.
That's true.
How could that happen? A guy that's been away for 7 years, has all the leverage in the world, can choose to come back or not, and he gets an opponent that he doesn't really care to fight again. And he says there's really nothing for him to gain for it. He doesn't know why he's doing it. He said it was a bad move. And I've said on this show, when they first announced this matchup, like, who was clamoring for that rematch? I haven't heard anyone ever over the last 17 years saying there needs to be a Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler rematch. It just kind of popped up out of nowhere. There was all these Chimaev, there were all these other matchups that we had mentioned that made sense, and they got Robbie Lawler. And I thought that part was interesting. Everything with the interview was interesting, but that part really stood out to me. That surprised me was that he didn't really have any influence or say into the fact that he's fighting Robbie Lawler, because he's obviously not happy about it. He's not excited about it. And I think that really stood out to me most, because he could have handpicked his opponent, really, I thought.
Yeah, I don't believe him for a second, James. I think he's saying that because he doesn't want to look like he's taking an easier fight. But I think he took this Robbie Lawler fight because it's interesting. He respects Robbie, but mostly because he knows the fight's going to go down the way he wants it to go down. They're going to stand and trade. It's not going to be a George St. Pierre takedown fest like it would be with Kamaru Usman or someone like that. So I think he's just saying the things that you need to say to save face, which is probably a very important attribute in Stockton. But I don't think I think he's delighted with the paycheck that's coming and with the opponent that he's facing. So I don't believe him.
By the way, am I the only person who thinks that Dana should have given him the Usman fight? I mean, you think about, oh my God, you think about the money that the UFC would make, and they should, to be fair to Nick, they should make it a 10-round fight, right? And I want to bring in our guest this evening, very good friend of ours, lead MMA reporter here from the 5 Reasons Sports Network, at 3-Piece Combo on Twitter. Jonathan Ramlakan. I mean, Jonathan, how dare Dana White disrespect Nick Diaz and not give him the Kamaru Usman fight that he deserves?
Yeah, they didn't give him the Kamaru Usman fight, and then secondarily, they didn't make it old classic UFC rules where you fight till the finish. I think that those rules would have definitely favored Nick Diaz.
Now, I guys, I wanted to do some fight picks and kind of preview this card together with Jonathan. So why don't we start with this fight? Because for me, this is the main event. I'm going to do the UFC a solid, and I'm going to stay up and watch the final 2 title fights. Although that Shevchenko fight, I don't think it's going to be competitive whatsoever. There's a reason why I think the line may be at like minus 2,000 now. Like, it's not even going to be a contest between Shevchenko and Lauren Murphy. I think the Volkanovski Ortega fight is a little bit more interesting from a competitive standpoint. But let's start with Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler. Now, let me start with Lawler. Now, the reason why Lawler is a slight favorite in this fight, I think, has a lot to do with his relative activity compared to Nick Diaz, because Nick hasn't fought in so long that it's hard to really know how much rust there's going to be when he steps in, the age. And Lawler's actually older than Diaz, but at least Lawler, again, has been relatively active, where Diaz hasn't fought since 2016 or 2015. So I think people are just having really a tough time confidently putting their money behind Diaz. I don't think Diaz being away so long is necessarily a bad thing. Lawler has been through some wars since the last time Diaz has fought. He's got a lot more mileage on him than Nick Diaz. I think that's a very important thing that people are forgetting, how much damage 39-year-old Robbie Lawler has taken relative to 38-year-old Nick Diaz. And in recent fights for Robbie Lawler, he looks so tentative to throw. It reminds me a lot of the way that Tyron Woodley looked in, the last few years before he stepped away from the UFC or got cut from the UFC, and now he's losing celebrity boxing fights. But like Robbie Lawler, fast hands and a lot of power. But if he's going to wait and not throw those hands, that theoretically puts him in a really bad matchup with a volume puncher like Nick Diaz. Now, Robbie's going to try to make up for his volume with power, but if he doesn't throw a whole lot, that's going to give him a lot of trouble on the scorecards. So, and listen, I can't guarantee you what Nick is going to look like after so long away. I don't think the sport has passed him by, though. And I talked about this with Frank. Frank was a guest on Donno Daly today. Despite the fact that Diaz hasn't been active in the octagon, he trains every day. He runs an MMA academy. He gets in sessions with the guys from Cesar Gracie. He keeps his body in great shape. He routinely, we can say all we want to about him not enjoying fighting. He does enjoy running those triathlons. He does that on a regular basis. So he keeps his body in great shape. This has not been a guy who's been playing video games and eating pizza for the last 6 years. This guy is treating his body like a temple with, a whole lot of smoke, weed smoke going through that temple, but still treating himself like a temple for the last 6 years. So I don't think octagon rust is going to be as big of a factor for him as some people think. Now, he has gotten older, but so has Robbie Lawler. And again, Diaz is the younger fighter here. So I'm going to try and take my Diaz bias out of this at least a little bit. I do think, based on the way Robbie has looked in recent years, I think this is a bad matchup for him. I don't think either guy finishes the other guy. And this is a 5-round fight, let's remember. Despite the fact that it's a non-title fight and it's 3 fights down on the card, they're still giving them 5 rounds, which is a huge advantage for cardio freak who gets stronger and better as the fight goes on in Nick Diaz. I see Diaz taking a 5-round decision in this fight. Mr. Ramlakan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you to spoil the pick right off the rip, right? But I want to say what's up to my boy Alex, and I want to say what's up to my boy Kryptonite. It's been a minute since I've seen you guys, so I appreciate y'all still checking out the MMA content.
By the way, I don't know what happened to James. James disappeared. I don't know where he went. Hopefully he comes back in.
We will have the return of James coming soon. He just went, blasting off like Team Rocket like usual with Jesse now. So, but yeah, as far as that, the people's main event goes, starting off with Nick Diaz, like you said, this is a guy that's continued to keep his body in shape, right? Him and Nate, no matter, Nate's obviously a little more active than Nick, but they train together, right? They work out together. They do everything together. So I'm sure there's a level of confidence going in, knowing that, hey, I'm training with somebody that's continually competing in the UFC, still working with the top of the line guys, having that fight with Masvidal, the fight with Leon Edwards, stuff like that. Although, if that fight went another round, Nate would have won that fight. But Nick has somebody there for him that's going to allow him to keep that mental edge, right? Nate's not going to allow him to go out there and let his big brother look like, for lack of better words, a little bitch, right? He's going to make sure that he has his screws on tight, that he's going out there with the best preparation possible. And, people were talking about the shadow boxing. That's the same shadow boxing we've seen from Nick Diaz. No matter what, his shadow boxing is loose. It's a little bit lazy. And when he gets into the fight and he starts hitting those shots and he starts getting in flow, that's something, like you said, as far as the volume goes, that's something that picks up later in the fight and that picks up continual in the fight. So I think this is something where we'll see people might confuse Nick Diaz's continually unloading over the rounds, right? Because he does start off slow, but he works his way and he continues to get stronger and stronger as the fight goes on. People might confuse that with ring rust, but we got to remember that's just the way, honestly, both Diaz brothers kind of fight. And as far as Robbie Lawler goes, you said it perfectly. He's very gun shy, just like Tyron Woodley was. He has all the power in the world, but for some reason he's scared to let go of those hands like he really should and like he really could. Another factor that might go into this, they're fighting at 185. And I'm not sure how big this factor will be, but now that they, made this last minute change to 185, shout out to Robbie Lawler for continuing to take the fight, right? He could have dropped out. He could have been like, hey, I've been cutting weight, anything. That's why Nick Diaz called him out, because he's a fighter's fighter. But as far as this fight goes, I think Lawler is going to be a little too gun shy. Like you said, I think the volume of Nick is going to be too much. I think Nick Diaz gets it done by decision.
And I'm going to get so drunk after he wins. Like it's going to be an absolute party. I've been waiting 6 years for this. And I lost my love for fighting a little bit, like, because there was a time when we weren't seeing either Diaz brother. And then once Nate fought Conor, his star really blew up after that. He's been more active. So I've had that in my life, at least. And Frank and I got to watch, and James and Jonathan, I'm not sure if either of you guys were at that fight in Orlando, but Frank, when we got to watch Nate fight Michael Johnson and win that fight, pull off an upset live, and that's when he had that like profanity-laced tirade afterwards. That was one of the greatest days ever, man. Now I get to watch Nick. James, go ahead, Frank.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love both of your breakdowns, except that, Robbie Lawler, I don't think he's going to be afraid to let it go. I mean, I think he's looking at redemption. I think he's looking at maybe going out on a really, really big high note, but he's going to have to win the fight in the first round, to your guys' point. And I think he's going to come out with fists of fury. I said this earlier with Alex on his show. I think he's going to come out with just overwhelming violence. But if there's one guy that could sustain that could handle that barrage, it would be Nick Diaz. So it may end up that Robbie burns himself out with his blitzkrieg, and then exactly what you say is going to happen happens. But it's been a minute since Nick Diaz has been hit that hard. It's different when you're sparring. So Robbie's going to come gunning for him, and it'll be very interesting to see if Nick survives the first round. If he does, then it's Nick all day. I mean,
just the only question here is, should I bet my mortgage or double my mortgage on Nick to win this fight? That's what I'm trying to figure out here.
Well, I'm not going to bet you because I'll never collect, but I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm taking Robbie TKO in the first round.
What about you, James?
I'm surprised Robbie's actually the favorite in this fight, because a lot of times with Vegas, they tend to go with who they think more of the money is going to go towards and try to make it prohibitive to bet with them. I think most of the money is going to go towards Nick, and I don't see why not. I mean, we can get into this later in the show about the UFC and whether they should be allowing this or not, and this is one reason why I'm not necessarily as big a Nick fan as you are, Alex. Nick is getting everything he wants for this fight. It's a non-title, non-main event fight. He wants 5 rounds. The UFC gives him 5 rounds. He shows up fight week, says, I don't want to cut weight, even though Robbie Lawler's been cutting weight and he's been draining himself. Okay, that's fine. We'll make it at 185. 15-pound difference. On top of that, he weighed in at the scale today at 185.5. He needed that extra pound to even make the weight that he had already jumped up to. Like he's getting every single thing that he wants to this fight. This fight is tailor-made for him to win. It's an opponent that he's already beaten. Mm-hmm. So why would Robbie Lawler be the favorite, even though it's 17 years later, other than the layoff? I think maybe they're overrating the layoff per se. But if Nick loses this fight and he got all the conditions that he wanted going into this fight to favor him, then I think it's kind of shame on Nick Diaz. The only thing I can see him losing this fight is due to the layoff and maybe the inactivity and the rust and stuff like that. But otherwise, I'm pretty shocked. What are the odds?
I'm looking at it right now. BetUS.com, the official sports book of 5 Reasons Sports, and the official sports book of Donno Daly as well. Yeah, Diaz is in the plus money, James. Nick Diaz, the slight underdog, he's plus 130. Robbie Lawler minus 160. So Diaz plus 130, Lawler minus 160. Wait, I'm just gonna go ahead,
Alex. I just got in my headset. Nick has just asked if they could fight at 205. So we're waiting for Robbie's answer.
Even better. And you know what? He can fight Jan Blachowicz for the belt probably on the same night after he beats Robbie. But no, I'm just gonna accept. James made some logical points there, which I will choose to completely disregard. And I will say that Nick Diaz at plus 130 is just simply a gift for the gambling gods, and it is plus money that I cannot possibly lose on. And you know what? If Diaz does lose this fight, there's a silver lining, because he said in the presser yesterday that he wants to keep fighting. Like, he doesn't look at this as a one-off. He wants to fight multiple times. And he said if he gets his ass beat, he's actually going to come back quicker. Right, because he's going to be hungrier to, actually come back and avenge the loss. Not necessarily fighting Lawler again, but to come back, fight anybody to avenge the loss. So that might be the only good thing that comes out of this, that if Diaz wins and looks really good doing so, he may say, I'm going to kick my feet up and take some time off. And when some fighters will take like 6 months off, Diaz time moves differently. Like, him taking some time off might be 2 or 3 years. So maybe it's better if he loses, because then I get to see him again probably within the next 6 months.
Well, the next time Dana White needs somebody to help him market stars that don't appeal to casual fans. Yeah, I mean, that's why he's on the card. That's why they're giving him everything he wants. So let's not confuse that. I mean, this is like a Scott Coker type fight, just to get people to buy a pay-per-view headline by Ortega and Volkanovski. That's what's happened.
Yeah, and we have 2 title fights on this card. I want to move into the co-main event, and honestly, like, maybe Jonathan can talk me out of this idea. I just don't think it's going to be much of a fight. I mean, I think Valentina Shevchenko is going to beat Lauren Murphy any way she wants to, and I mean that as a compliment to Shevchenko, but I don't think this is going to be a particularly competitive or long fight. What do you think?
I mean, I'm right there with you. It's really hard to think any other way. I had Andrade giving her a really tough time, and what she did to Jessica Andrade was absolutely devastating. And somebody like Lauren Murphy, don't get me wrong, she's earned the shot. She's worked her way up, but she doesn't have any spectacular skills that sets her apart from anybody else. And for somebody like that, it's going to be hard for her to find where she can win this fight, because we saw with Shevchenko, her striking is absolutely devastating. When she took Andrade down, she got her in a crucifix and she was raining down elbows. What was it, a first round finish? Yeah, absolutely murderous. So no matter if it's on the feet or on the ground, I feel like Shevchenko is better. I mean, if Lauren Murphy can maybe push her up against the cage, make it a grimy kind of fight, she can delay the inevitable, right? But I'm right there with you. I think Shevchenko gets a pretty early finish in this fight.
Ooh, you know what? I want to get to this after we finish our fight picks for this one. Before we get to the main event, I want to entertain this question from our guy Cap for Life. But before we get to that, James and then Frank. I mean, James, do you see this going any other way than Valentina Shevchenko getting her hand raised?
No, and it doesn't even go to a decision. It's going to be a finish. And I want to save this a little bit for my kudos and complaints section. It kind of has to do with Valentina Shevchenko. So I'll just drop that clue and pass the ball to Frank there. But no, I think Shevchenko wins this easily. And they need to find her some contenders. So go ahead, Frank. I'll save the rest.
Well, this is just a problem with women's mixed martial arts right now. There are 2 really top echelon fighters, Shevchenko and Amanda Nunes, and then there's just a whole bunch of stuff that just doesn't measure up, unfortunately. While the sport in that gender has developed, the Shevchenkos or Amanda Nunes, they now exist and have that kind of high level talent and coaching. There isn't the depth yet, and that I don't know how much longer that will take to come. So no, this is going to be not interesting at all. But she's a fantastic athlete to watch. So from that perspective, it would be entertaining. But there is zero chance that she loses this fight.
So Real quick, hold on. I pulled up the wrong question. Cap for life, and I would just correct the last part of it because it shouldn't have much to do with MMA, but boxing, yes. Cap for life says, gentlemen, your thoughts on Logan Paul, and we could throw Jake Paul in there as well. Is he helping or hurting boxing, combat sports? Your thoughts? Listen, I'm old fashioned, and I think I may have to give the floor to Frank after I give my answer. We'll go around the table, but I mean, I'm old fashioned to a point where. I can remember when I fell in love with boxing, like I fell in love with Mike Tyson back in the day. Like, and yeah, he was scary, but he wasn't a circus freak. Like it wasn't a sideshow. Like this is, the best heavyweight in the world at that time, a guy who terrified everybody. And then when I fell in love with MMA, I fell in love with people like Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes. I actually appreciated wrestling before wrestling was cool. Then I discovered, the Pride Fighting Championships, and my mind was just blown. So, I didn't need gimmicks. Like I didn't need people who were famous for other things crossing over, to do something where they really don't belong. And okay, at least like Jake Paul, at least can kind of box. Like he looks like a good novice boxer. Like Logan Paul, it's a complete freak show. Like the guy can't really box, and he just goes out there and gets paid millions of dollars to lose to washed up former fighters. So I mean, I don't know. I can't say for sure whether it's helping or hurting because like I'm not that old. I'm 37, but I still like this whole thing, it alienates me. Maybe this is what the teenagers and the kids are into. Maybe if you want to create the next generation of great fight fans, the attention span of like the teenagers out there, they don't have the patience to watch, Diaz brothers fight. They need to see their favorite YouTuber go in, to the ring and fight. I'm not a fan of it. What do you think, Frank?
Well, you know how I feel. I mean, I keep going off on it. I mean, look, unfortunately, this is the future because, when you're getting billions of clicks, like these Paul brothers are, I mean, they're directing how this is going to go, and people's pay-per-view money is going in that direction as well. So it's terrifying on the one hand to think of it that way, but on the other hand, they can't exist unless there's a real architecture of genuine fighting that's happening. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, there's nothing for them to do. So I guess that is the saving grace. There's no retired or washed up person for Logan Paul to fight if you don't have the architecture that is the UFC or what we have in boxing. But what makes me sad is there'll be an interesting fight card on this Saturday, tomorrow, that many people may not watch because they've blown their budget on watching a former Disney star, box Tyron Woodley. No, but I mean, it's a real thing. The stuff's expensive. And for some people, you can't do 2 or 3 of these things in the last 30 or 40 days. So that's the part that upsets me a little bit. But
here's the one area where I think Logan and Jake Paul can actually help the sport of boxing. But boxing has to be smart enough to look past the antics. They are doing something marketing-wise that Showtime, HBO, all the major promotions should be copying or at least learning from and taking pieces and parts. There are so many boxing champions out there that most fans don't even know their name. And Logan and Jake Paul have done certain things, to get their name out there. If boxing can take just that marketing part, forget about the quality of the fights and all that kind of stuff, all the sideshow and stuff like that, but learn from the marketing part and put that towards their champions where the actual real fighting and the real quality is, I think boxing could actually be helped from Jake and Logan Paul if they're smart enough to do that. But mostly I think they're just going to kind of look at it as a circus and a sideshow, and they're not going to take anything from it. But I think that one aspect of it, that marketing aspect of it, to get fighters' names out there, if they can kind of learn from that and take that and put it towards their champions and the good fighters, I think that will help boxing. It's that Ali rule, though, right, James? I mean, that's what ruined boxing, was that Ali rule where then they could just create an infinite number of belts to prevent the Don Kings of the world from dominating the sport. And that's what really screwed everything up. And that's why everyone loves the UFC but hates the UFC with fighter pay. They finally have, I keep using the word architecture, but I like it. But they finally have this assembly, I'll use a different word, where the best have to fight the best, and now we're mad that, they're not getting paid the way, these boxers are getting paid. But you can't have it both ways. Alex, you referenced when you fell in love with boxing. I remember falling in love
with boxing too, but I actually didn't fall in love initially with the heavyweights. It was the middleweight division with Hagler and Hearns and Leonard and all these guys. And holy crap, I mean, they all fought each other, and it was just spectacular, and the person that rose to the top of that, hornet's nest of talent was truly great. And one of the texters wrote in, they didn't give us Mayweather and Pacquiao until Pacquiao was broken and Mayweather was old. And, that's true. The problem. That's
5 years too late.
But it came from the unintended consequence of trying to fix an ecosystem in which Don King could make a lot of money. And now Dana White and whatever this agency is that owns the league, they make a lot of money. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, WME. Jonathan, I'll give you the last word on the Paul brothers. Good or bad for combat sports?
Good. You're bringing more eyes onto the sport. The reason I'll say this is because I experienced this firsthand. Like, my 8-year-old niece asked me if I was watching a fight, right? Because I always have it on my phone, especially if I'm going out on a Saturday. And I, at 8 years old, only knew what WWE was. Like, I didn't even know MMA or boxing really even existed, right? I knew it was a thing, boxing at least, not MMA. But all I knew was WWE. So I think regardless of the kind of eyes you're getting on the sport, you're still getting eyes on the sport. And let's say just 5% of the people that watch the sport for the spectacle for the first time decide to stay. Hey, I kind of like this. This is kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on here. That's more people that's going to go every single time and continue to watch the sports. And in combat sports overall, UFC obviously is continuing to peak, but boxing is kind of making a slight comeback now. And I think it's kind of in part because of some of these celebrity fights. They're bringing more eyes back to the sport. What Jake Paul did on his card was amazing, especially with the fighter pay, right? He gave out, 400,000, 500. He gave out a lot of money to a lot of other fighters. So as far as, the purists go, I know you guys aren't a big fan because you want the best fighting the best, and that's what people deserve to be watching. And I 100% agree with you. But as far as, like James said, the marketing aspect, you're bringing a lot more eyes that probably wouldn't have been watching in the first place. So having more eyes at the end of the day is only going to be something that's beneficial.
Jonathan, the most troubling thing you said was that you go out on Saturday night. You need to be home watching fights.
Yeah, what the hell? Every week, man.
If I'm at my older sister's house on a Saturday night, I'm watching my fights on the phone.
Okay. All right,
100%.
And they do like 50 events now a year. There's only 2 Saturday nights a year that I have free now. They do events pretty much every weekend. But gentlemen, for this Saturday night, September 25th, UFC 266. Let's move on to the main event. I like this fight, even though I have a pretty clear opinion on who's going to win it. I think that it could be really entertaining along the way, and I'm not going to completely rule out an upset here. Alexander Volkanovski, the featherweight champion, will defend his belt against T-City Brian Ortega. Ortega hasn't been very active. Now, the last time we saw him, maybe the best tactical performance of his career, because he finally looked like he was putting everything together against the Korean Zombie. Now, I also thought the Korean Zombie fought a really poor fight by his standards, a little bit of a way too tentative of a fight, I should say, by his standards. So it gave Ortega the opportunity to show a more measured, well-rounded approach. But to me, Alexander Volkanovski is just such a machine. Now, I agree with something that James said earlier. Max Holloway, I thought, won the rematch. Like, I don't even think that Volkanovski should be carrying around that belt right now, but I do think he's better than Brian Ortega. Now, Volkanovski, he is like a grandmaster in chess. He is such a cerebral fighter, does such a great job making adjustments and also showing you so many different looks with his stances and the way that he throws. He's going to bait you into making mistakes and going right into his attack. And he's going to get better as the fight goes on, right? He may have a bit of a slow start, and that certainly was the case in the rematch with Max Holloway. Had a very slow start, maybe too slow of a start, because I thought he lost the first 3 rounds. The judges, 2 of them, thought that he lost the first 2 rounds, not 3. But then as the fight goes on, he's going to figure you out. He's going to get your timing down, and he's going to tailor make his attack to chip away at you late in the fight. Now, he hasn't finished a fight in a long time. 4 fights ago against Chad Mendes was the last time he finished. And I know he desperately, Volkanovski, wants to finish this fight because he hates Brian Ortega. Like, Brian Ortega has been shit-talking him, calling him a point fighter. Although I thought Volkanovski did a really nice job jawing with him at the stare down yesterday because he brought up, and this was years ago, but Ortega, he has been caught with PEDs before. And then Volkanovski brought up how I found out you were a cheater. Like, you don't even deserve to be here. You don't deserve to be in this fight. So this is going to be heated. There's no love lost between these two guys. This may be one of the rare occasions because oftentimes you'll see guys who hate each other before the fight earn each other's respect once the fight is over. I don't know if that's going to be the case in this one because there seems to be a lot of animosity here. And something like a misconception with Volkanovski because he's so short. He's only 5'6". He's giving up a few inches in height to Ortega. He's actually got 2 inches longer of a reach. And that was the case also in the Holloway fight. I mean, Max Holloway, height-wise, is a giant for that division, yet Volkanovski has a 71-inch reach, going to be 2 inches longer than Ortega's reach. I think it was 2 or 3 inches longer than Holloway's reach as well. So despite the fact that he's got that short, low center of gravity, he can also cover a lot of distance with his punches. I think it's with kicks where Ortega will be able to cover more ground that way. But Volkanovski also, his leg kicks are excellent. And if Ortega is not prepared for that, like Holloway wasn't in the first fight, he can really take a lot away from Ortega's legs. So I think this is going to end up being a 5-round decision. So I think 2 of the last 3 fights are going to go 5 rounds. So let's hope that Shevchenko makes quick work of Murphy. Otherwise, we're going to be in for like a 2 a.m. type of finish. So hopefully the middle of those 3 fights is a quick one. But I think Volkanovski is going to get his hand raised by a decision. I'll go to Jonathan next. What do you think?
Yeah, this one is probably one of the toughest fights that I've ever broken down because this is one that I've gone back and forth on for a long time because, you know, when the fight gets to the ground, you kind of have to give Ortega the advantage as far as, you know, he has an amazing submission game, whether he's off his back, whether he's on top. His submission game is really top tier. But I feel like Volkanovski, like you said, he's a cerebral athlete. This is a guy that played rugby at over 200 pounds and now cut down to 145 pounds and is now, you know, currently the champion. This guy is so cerebral. I feel like he'll know if he gets that top position how to stay out of the danger zone from Brian Ortega. And he's somebody that can fight back from adversity as well, right? You spoke about his last finish against Chad Mendes. He got hurt early in that fight. He got dropped by Chad Mendes early in that fight. And he came back and he ended up finishing Chad Mendes. And that just shows the mental capabilities, the championship mindset that Alexander Volkanovski has. And he's on a hell of a streak right now as well. As far as Brian Ortega goes, that last performance against TKZ, like you said, TKZ didn't even remember anything past the second round after that spinning elbow. So that could have been a factor for the later rounds. You know, earlier he didn't look good either, but the last couple rounds he doesn't even remember. So that's on him. But Brian Ortega looks really good. His striking is cleaned up a lot. He's a lot more crisp. Like you said, I really like the way he was kicking in that fight against the Korean Zombie. And he just looks like he's in a little bit better of a flow state when he's striking now. He left the sport, like Cap for Life said, he kind of reinvented himself as far as the striking game goes, and he looks a lot better there. So the striking is really even. I'm going to give the power edge to Alexander Volkanovski here. And as far as the ground game goes, I'm going to give it to Brian Ortega, even if Volkanovski is able to get the top position. I think he's still dangerous. Of course, Volkanovski will win the scorecard if he does have that top position. After yesterday, I'm going to go with Alexander Volkanovski. I feel like, and I know this may be an easy way out, I feel like mentally he's just a little bit above Brian Ortega. And I think if anything is to happen in this fight, like you said, he went down 2, potentially 3 rounds against Holloway, and he was able to fight himself back. I think that, I think Volkanovski gets it done. Alex, why do you think striking is not even? Do you think there's a little bit of disparity there? I'm just curious on that because I think Volkanovski has definitely raised his striking level. The power, like I said, definitely goes to Volkanovski, but Ortega got a lot better in the striking. But I do give it to Volkanovski. I think he gets it done.
Frank, what do you think? I said it last week. I don't believe in Brian Ortega. I agree with everything Jonathan said, but I think he gets cracked early. I think he gets in a lot of trouble quickly. Volkanovski's so fast. We haven't talked about his speed either, and I guess I wasn't aware of the reach disparity between these two. But that low center of gravity, the fact that he used to be a bigger man, which means he really still is a bigger man, which means he really still thinks like that, is a huge advantage. And I don't know. I mean, maybe Brian Ortega will surprise me. I don't have the detailed breakdown. I just have a sense. Brian Ortega just seems like he's good, but not next level great to me. And Volkanovski, getting through Max Holloway twice, forget about it. I mean, I don't see anything stopping this guy except maybe Max in another run through. But my money's all on Volkanovski. And by the way, with Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler on this card, hopefully people are going to watch these two great fighters in the main event. So kudos to Dana White for doing it this way, because what you're going to see in the main event is MMA at its highest level, in my opinion, or at close to its highest level. So that'll be a great introduction to fans that just tune in because they love Nick Diaz.
Yeah, and I like Volkanovski as well, but it was something that I just realized earlier today when I was researching this fight. Man, time is flying during this pandemic. Volkanovski hasn't fought in 14 months.
Yeah. Has it been that long? Oh, was it 251, I think was the last. I didn't realize it had been that long.
Yeah, wow. It's been that long. It's like time is standing still during this pandemic. 14 months is a long time, to go between title defenses. And I mean, I can really get in the weeds and all the interim titles and how Ngannou got stripped with not fighting it for 6 months and all stuff. I'm not going to get to all that.
That's a great point. But he didn't get stripped, but they created.
Created the interim belt and everything. But Volkanovski hasn't defended his belt since he fought Max Holloway, and he had 2 consecutive training camps for the same guy. So to have that kind of layoff and really spending the prior year, even before that, training for the same guy, that could be a little bit of trouble. Just having that curveball, that T-City curveball, and what he brings to the table, especially on the ground, that might give Volkanovski a little bit of trouble in the early rounds. I think if Volkanovski can really start fast, which isn't his forte, but if he can kind of start fast and show that he's not going to have that cage rust from not getting in there for the past 14 months, I don't think it'll be a problem. But really, I think that's his biggest hurdle. Once he gets over that, maybe warms up, gets to that second round, gets a little sweat going, and gets in that rhythm, I think he can take over the fight from there. But that first round could be a dangerous one for Volkanovski.
And by the way,
I would just throw one more quick thing, Alex. I would just throw in there that if the beef is real, and I'm never quite sure if the beef is real, but if the beef is real, it'd be interesting to see who it affects, because if someone comes in mad and fights emotionally, that will put them at a disadvantage. And my money would be on Ortega, because as Jonathan pointed out, Volkanovski, very cerebral. He's not going to let that happen.
And here are the odds for this fight, by the way, courtesy of betus.com. Volkanovski, the favorite at -180, Ortega +150. So honestly, I think no matter which side you're on, you can argue that those are good numbers, because if you feel pretty confident in Volkanovski like I do, to be able to get that at better odds than like a -200, like I don't mind. I prefer when the odds are a little bit closer, but I don't mind laying down 180 to win 100 back on Volkanovski. And then for anyone backing Ortega, you're thinking, oh, this is an opportunity. I can get Brian Ortega in the plus money to surprise everybody and win. So I think that those odds are pretty good on both sides. I don't want to spend as much time on the other 2 fights in the main card, but we'll go around the table. And by the way, I've got odds on the Lauren Murphy Shevchenko fight, because those odds have been moving around a lot, because I'd seen it I think as recently as yesterday with Shevchenko up -2,000. Then this morning I saw her at -1,500. She's now -1,800. So you've got to bet $1,800 to win $100 back on Shevchenko. I would highly recommend either putting that in a very big parlay or finding some props there if you're going to bet on her.
Who does those?
Maybe
bets?
we see Shevchenko accidentally knee Lauren Murphy on the head while she's down, and Lauren Murphy wins. That could be a potential round for this.
That's true. That is true. And James, you were asking who actually bets on that.
Who bets those -2,000, -1,800 bets to win $100?
Really dumb people, or like, and I like, to me, it's not like there are no sure things in life, especially not in the fight game. Like, even if I can think, Shevchenko feels like a sure thing, am I sure enough to plop down like $3,600 if I want to win $200 get back? No. Like, I do know that there are some very rich people in Las Vegas who will just stroll up to the window at the sports book with like stacks of cash and say like, oh, I can't lose on this one. I do know someone who is a professional sports gambler, and it's I'll just say who it's not, because people may assume it's my guy Lee Sterling who joins me. It's not him. It's another professional sports gambler I know who actually won a lot of money, but had to put a ton of money down, like 6 figures he had to put down on Floyd Mayweather against Conor McGregor. He put the money down on Floyd Mayweather, and like he told me about this, and he said like, I knew this was a sure thing. Like, there was really no reasonable expectation that Conor McGregor could win this fight. What he told me was, He's a professional sports gambler. He had 6 figures to put on this fight. I did not, so I stayed away from it. He told me he was surprised there were even odds on it. Like, he honestly thought this should have been one of those things that's not even on the books. Like, for example, college football tomorrow, the Miami Hurricanes play the powerhouse that is Central Connecticut State, which is an FCS school that doesn't even give their football players scholarships. And you can't bet on the game. God. There are no odds on it. I was looking through my sports book today, 2 sports books, nothing. I asked Lee Sterling about it. He confirmed he's on 5 sports books. There are no odds for that game. You cannot bet on it. My friend thought that should have been the case for this Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor fight, that there should not even been odds on it in his opinion. So he felt like it was taking candy from a baby.
Wish my Irish were playing that team tomorrow.
Yeah. Those are the types of teams Miami needs to play if they're going to win games. So we need to be playing more games like that. Curtis Blaydes, Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I am picking Blaydes to win. I actually kind of thought when I saw Curtis Blaydes at minus 250, I was actually surprised the odds were that long. Curtis Blaydes, hold on, I can't find I think it's, if I don't see it in front of me, but I think it was Rozenstruik plus 180, Curtis Blaydes minus 250. I will go with Blaydes, but I don't think I'm going to bet on it at those odds. I just think for Curtis Blaydes, the wrestling and his ability to dictate where the fight takes place is going to be the difference. Every round starts standing up, so Rozenstruik has a chance, but I think Blaydes takes it. I'll go, James, to you next.
I actually like the odds on this for Rozenstruik. You mentioned the puncher's chance. I mean, that's kind of what happened to Curtis Blaydes in the last fight, right, against Derek Lewis. Puncher's chance, knocked him out.
I'm sorry. You know what? I had that. It's even wider than I thought I had. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just found it on my sports book. Curtis Blaydes minus 350.
Wow.
So I'm definitely not taking that action. Blaydes minus 350, Rozenstruik plus 250.
Even better. I like the puncher's chance. Not saying that Rozenstruik is a better fighter or anything like that. I'm just playing the odds here. Since we're talking odds, I think there's a ton of value there for Rozenstruik getting a knockout, getting a finish, just like Derek Lewis did in Curtis Blaydes' last fight.
Yeah, you know what? You may have talked me into actually it being worth throwing a few bucks on Rozenstruik because plus 250, that's sweet. Frank, I'll go to you next, and then I'll let Jonathan have the last word.
I mean, I'll go quickly. I've got Curtis Blaydes, but I don't bet heavyweight, because I mean, one of them just has to touch the other and almost anywhere, and the whole fight can go. Just like James just referenced Curtis Blaydes' last loss, right, to Derek Lewis. Was that his last fight?
Yeah,
I think it was. Yeah. So I mean, and that shouldn't have gone that way. So I stay away from those when I bet.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I think that's a tough. It's not a tough one as far as the fight goes. I think, of course, Jairzinho has the puncher's chance. We did see him get controlled for 4.5 rounds and then knock out Alistair Overeem. So he does that. He does have that in the bag. He always will have that in the bag. That power is there, and he's phenomenal kickboxer, right? But I think Curtis Blaydes might have learned his lesson. He stood up a little bit too much for Derek Lewis for my liking as far as the way his game plan should have gone. I think he comes super heavy wrestling in this fight. He goes right away, power double leg, and he goes for the takedown right off the rip. I think we'll see a much more wrestling heavy Curtis Blaydes than we saw against Derek Lewis.
And the last main card fight, or the first main card fight, I should say, we go in order from main event on down, although we did do the Diaz fight first. But Jessica Andrade, who's a minus 240 favorite against Cynthia Calvillo at plus 190. Cookie cutter for me. I'm going with Andrade. I don't know if I'll bet it again because it's in the 200s, but I'm going with Jessica Andrade. Jonathan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, right there with you. I think she still is elite at that flyweight division. I think this should be her home. She's just behind a world beater in Shevchenko, so I think it'll be tough for her to win the gold. But I think as far as in this division, Jessica Andrade is an absolute threat, so I think she gets it done.
Agreed. Yeah. I agree 100%. Yeah, it's an easy pick.
James?
I agree, Andrade as well. And Andrade is kind of one of those fighters that is good for the UFC, but is bad for the UFC because she's great enough that she's going to pretty much run through all the next up-and-coming contenders that can try to challenge and be a new challenger for the champion, but she can't beat the champion. So where do you really go with her when, she'll be number 2, number 1, ranked number 3 the whole time because she's running through everybody else in the division, but she can't beat the champ. So it's really nothing really to do with her but to keep giving her contenders.
Before we wrap up this episode, I want to do one more feature, and I want Jonathan to play with us, even though I may be putting him on the spot a little bit for this, because I think me, James, and Frank are prepared for it. Jonathan is not, so he can learn the game as we go on. Before we wrap it up, we're going to give a kudo and a complaint. Kudos and complaints, something we compliment, something we rip a little bit. We'll start with the kudos. I'll go first, then James, then Frank, and then Jonathan to give him some time to think. My kudos, I'm giving it to ESPN Plus. Because if you go to the UFC page on ESPN Plus, and they've had this up there for about 2 weeks now, they have the front page littered with archived Nick Diaz fights. I've watched them all. They have about, unfortunately, they don't have like the Strikeforce stuff and the Pride stuff. Even though they own the rights to those promotions, they still don't, which is very unfortunate. But they have basically every UFC fight of Nick Diaz littering the front page of the UFC page to get people prepared for his rematch with Robbie Lawler tomorrow, including the original Robbie Lawler fight. So those who may not have watched it 17 years ago, you can watch it, tonight or tomorrow in the build up for this fight. So kudos to ESPN Plus for putting all these Nick Diaz fights on the front page of their UFC section. So for people like me who just want to get pumped, or, people who've gotten into the sport within the last 6 years and don't know what Nick Diaz is all about, you can watch some of his handiwork. What do you got, James?
My kudos actually goes to the combatant on the other side of that matchup. My kudos goes to Robbie Lawler. I know, right? Robbie Lawler this week. He could have, and I would even say should have, made more of a stink about all that was going on with this weight situation, with Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz couldn't come to the UFC a month ago, 2 months ago, and say, hey, I don't want to cut weight. Let's make this at 185. Robbie Lawler would have accepted it a month ago, and he wouldn't have had to drain himself. Why do that during fight week? But to Robbie Lawler's credit, one, he accepted the fight and said, okay, I'll do it. But two, when he was asked 15 times during the press conference, what do you think about it? Do you think it's a negative thing? Who does it impact more? All this kind of stuff. He said, you know what? I came here ready to fight. I'm not going to make a stink about it. It is what it is. And, we'll see on Saturday. So kudos to Robbie Lawler for being the professional in this thing. I really don't think what Nick did was very professional at all. But since he had the leverage, he was able to get away with it. I think potentially it could set a dangerous precedent for other fighters with leverage, like a Conor McGregor or some other fighters down the road who might want to pull these kind of antics, and say, well, Nick Diaz got away with it. But my kudos goes to Robbie Lawler for handling a tough situation in a professional way.
That's a good one. My kudos, despite what has now become a misdemeanor, whatever charge, is to Jon Jones for giving us that commentary yesterday or the day before and letting us know that he is ready to return to fight. The Dark Knight returns, the Darth Vader of the UFC, the greatest fighter we've ever had in the sport. And the thing that made me happiest about what he said is he's willing to fight Stipe Miocic potentially, which really opens the doors to definitely seeing a Jon Jones return in 2022. He's not necessarily going to demand the fight that everyone expects. So that's my kudos.
I'm gonna go with somebody fighting on the card. I'm gonna go with Dan Hooker. Right, he had a horrible visa issue, and he was able to make the flight last minute. Dude made weight today. No one should ever have an excuse for not making weight. This dude had to fly in 3 days across the world into Vegas. They're fighting in Vegas, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Into Vegas, and he still made weight. So no one can ever, make an excuse about not making weight, because Dan Hooker did it. And man, that's definitely my kudos.
Well, didn't he have to beg the the U.S. ambassador to expedite his visa requests? I think there's, and I know that Israel Adesanya, who's a New Zealander, really complained about the way things are being handled over there with the bureaucracies and the lockdowns. He says he's never going to fight in his home country again, just to punish them. So there's a lot going on there that I don't claim to understand the New Zealand politics, but I know there's a lot of unhappy people over there.
So bad. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Australia and New Zealand. It's over the top scary.
Yeah. Actually a good friend of mine, Anthony Privatera, lives in Australia, and I connect with him a lot for soccer content. And he's able to work because his job is an essential job. It's bad because they've been on these serious lockdowns with businesses being closed down for, and obviously it's bad. It's really bad over there. So that's a really good kudos. I'll start with the complaints. My complaint, and I like this dude a lot, but come on. Yoel Romero
That's mine, damn
it. Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I paid for it.
God. Well, yeah. Not only, I'm not even the fight itself, which wasn't good, but how do you go through your entire fight camp and you arrive at the fight and you think it's a 5-round fight when it's a 3-round fight? Like how? I mean, I guess you can also blame his entourage, his management, his coaches for not letting him know Yoel is a 3-round fight, not 5-round fight, 3-round fight, because he claims he had no idea. Even if it was a 5-round fight, I don't think he would have won the fight. But that's, I mean, come on, you got to know rule number 1. You got to know how many rounds you're fighting, right? I know you come from the UFC where the main events are 5 rounds. Someone needed to let him know it was a 3-round fight, not a 5-round fight. We'll go James and then Jonathan, since maybe we'll give Frank enough time to think of a new one.
I got another one. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So James, go ahead.
So my complaint here goes to UFC matchmaking for Amanda Nunes and Valentina Shevchenko. Can we get those two in a super fight rematch already? Yeah. You know, like, how long are we going to wait? How long are we going to dredge out these would-be challengers to their belt and knowing that they're going to get run through in a round or two every, 3 or 4 months? And the fights are minus 2,000 for Nunes and minus 2,000 for Shevchenko. No one really is going to buy the pay-per-view to see either of them, win in a round or so. They're buying the pay-per-view for other fights. But if you put those two together, one, they've already fought. 2, they can fight in Nunes's lowest weight class. It would be a super fight. It could be a main event. It would be a fight that people want to pay for. It would be good for legacy, good for the sport of women's MMA. Don't wait 2 or 3 years till one of them loses or one of them falls out of their prime. They're both in their prime right now. The time is now. If we've learned anything this week from Jon Jones getting in trouble, when we've been talking for all year, all year we've been talking about Jon Jones, Francis and Gandu, put that match together. It should have happened this summer. Should have happened in September, XYZ. Now we got to wait till next year. Jon Jones may have put that matchup in jeopardy. We have another super fight that we can have on the women's side. Put it together before something happens, and we never see that fight. Or we actually saw it the first time, but we don't see it when both of them are actually right in their primes.
By the way, I agree with what Alex M is saying, that he likes the random daytime events, and I think one of the upcoming events in Abu Dhabi is going to be a daytime numbered event. I kind of like it. I'm also I'm a morning person now. I used to be a night owl. I think Jonathan's a night owl. I was right there with you before I had a kid, and then I became a morning person. Yeah. So if you give me like a weird 11 a.m. event, I'm like, hallelujah. Frank, I'll let you go next with the complaint.
My complaint is one I voiced last week. My complaint is with Dana White for letting Bellator become an interesting light heavyweight division league. Ryan Bader, Phil Davis, now Yoel Romero. Why can't Yoel Romero be a light heavyweight in the UFC? I don't understand. Look, I know that the talent level is overall better in the UFC, but the interesting fighters, the fighters that people are interested in that division, are in Bellator right now. And it bothers me. And it was manageable. They could have prevented this from happening.
Yeah, and as far as mine goes, as far as complaints, James, spoke on a little bit, man. Jon Jones, dude just can't stay out of trouble. And like you said, man, we all wanted to see this super potentially biggest fight as far as the heavyweight division goes, Jon Jones versus Francis and Gandu. Now, we don't even know if this fight's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen as far as Jon Jones even coming back and fighting again. And it happens a day after he does his Hall of Fame speech, which is even worse. So big complaint there, man. Dude's got to stay out of trouble. I mean, you think he learned by now. That's all I got to say.
I love it. Well said. And just want to let people know on next week's show, we're going to bring back the gift card giveaways for the quarterdeck. I ran out of gift cards, so I'm going to get more. I'm going to see Frank down there next week. I'm going to get more gift cards. And on that note, Alex M, do me a favor, bro, because Alex M won the gift card last week. I know he's commented to me on Instagram before, so please do me a favor, Alex, because I want to mail this gift card to you. Please, because I forgot what your Instagram handle is. Please find me and send me a message, and I need to get your address because I want to mail you the quarterdeck gift card that you won last week. He says I forgot, bro. Well, now I'm reminding you. So send me an Instagram message. I have the gift card ready for you. I just got to mail it to you. So send me your address on the IG, and I will rectify that situation. So we're going to bring back the gift card giveaway next week. And guys, make sure, again, I can't say this enough, Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill tomorrow. That is the spot. Let's say you don't want to pay the $70 to watch it on ESPN Plus. I don't blame you. It's expensive. The Quarterdeck offers this and every UFC pay-per-view for zero cover charge. You pay nothing at the door while you enjoy the 2-for-1 happy hour, the amazing drink specials, the fresh seafood, the great sandwiches. I love the burgers. I love the French dip sandwich. There's so many great options. The jerk chicken sandwich at the Quarterdeck. So you can enjoy every UFC pay-per-view at the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill, locations all over Broward County for zero cover charge, my friends. And of course, college football Saturday, tomorrow, and just hang out there all day through the UFC card. Sunday, the NFL Sundays, you get the 5 for $15 ice cold buckets of beer. It is a beautiful thing at the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Come for the food, stay for the fun.
Guys, I don't know if I'm going to survive tomorrow, bro. My game starts at noon and then the UFC at 10 p.m. I could be dead tomorrow. Somebody check it on.
Yeah, but if who does Notre Dame play tomorrow, by the way?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Okay, that's a good game.
Yeah,
So if Notre Dame wins, though,
you can't block anybody, so I'm a little nervous about it.
If Notre Dame wins, you're going to be charged up with adrenaline, so you'll be fine. If they lose, you'll probably pass out.
If they lose, I'm going to boycott the UFC and be pissed off and go to sleep.
Well, just go to sleep after the real main event. Just like the Diaz Lawler fight will, I don't know, probably be over. I would think like around 11 because you want to So
Diaz Lawler is worth $70.
It is
100%. Yeah.
It is. So huge thanks to Frank, to James. You could see, not Frank's, but you could see the Twitter handles for our other panelists here. Frank doesn't want people to follow him on Twitter. He's if you do want to, at @realFrank_Z. James Walker is at James Walker NFL. Jonathan is at 3-Piece Combo. We'll talk to you guys again next week for another episode of 5 Rounds on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.